Hello. This video's purpose is to show you how I typically prep a unit to be CNC'd with a couple of different types of shapes that we might deal with here. So let's get to it. The first thing is that I don't lay out my CNC in the same file. I'm going to open a new file, bring the architecture that I've created from my three-dimensional model into that new file so that those two things are not ever gonna, so that I can't mess up something in my model on my CNC. What that means though is that you have to be done designing before you start plating for CNC. And truthfully, you should be done designing by the time you're starting to plate for CNC or starting to prep your CNC file. So with that information, let's go ahead and copy and paste this into a new file. Now this is not a complicated thing. This is just a little staircase that I just whipped up a few minutes ago. So, it's not a big deal, but just, do be careful, friends. Do be careful. I have a locator in here that I typically bring into all my drawings. I'm gonna go and get rid of it because I'm not gonna need it for this. So you can see that I have my three-dimensional thing that I literally just copy and pasted into this drawing. I'm gonna start by giving myself a reference box for where things are going to lay out onto a sheet. And I'm going to put it at 0, 0, 0 so that when I bring it into Aspire, it's going to be smack dab exactly where it's supposed to be. The next thing I'm going to do is disassemble the unit. And I'm going to do that one piece at a time, laying things in logical places, ideally. It doesn't have to be logical. It can be kind of haphazard if that's how you roll, but I don't roll that way, so here we are. I'm going to rotate those at the same time because I can. Those rotated in a weird way. It doesn't matter. And you can see that I'm just laying things out in a way that I can see them all, and that I'm being careful to not duplicate or subtract anything. And the reason for that is because if I have a bunch of pieces that look the same, and I put them onto a sheet, if I copy and assume that I'm just going to get the right number, I very much could be introducing error into it. So by literally taking the actual parts that you've designed and laying them out one at a time, you're kind of preventing silly errors from happening. At least that's the idea and the goal. Okay, so I've started laying these out onto my sheet of plywood. Something that I will pretty much always do if I have the space, and which I do in this situation, is to hold back from the edges. The reason that I do that is because if you're building or if you're aligning everything exactly up to the edge, then you're kind of de facto assuming that every single sheet of plywood that we cut gets put onto the CNC machine exactly perfect. And I think that's probably a little bit of a generous assumption. So, and it's also assuming that the sheet hasn't been damaged at the factory, like, it falls off of something and you've got a little bit of dinged up edge. This is just eliminating the possibility of using a dinged up edge or an ever so slightly out of square edge or whatever. And it doesn't always work. Like sometimes you absolutely have to use the edge, and when that happens, that's fine. It's fine. But if we can avoid it, we avoid it. Something that you'll notice as I'm doing this is that I am paying attention to grain direction. So these are stairs that are spanning 2 feet. I am using plywood, so I need to be careful about grain direction because I need those treads to be oriented in the strong axis of the plywood, which means along the long edge. That's the downside to using some of the tools that Aspire has. If we don't care about the grain, like say we're cutting on MDF, or say we're making something that is, maybe it's entirely cosmetic, like we're not putting any loads on it, we're not expecting that material to do much work, then like grain direction does not matter. Put it, use the nesting tool, drop everything into Aspire, use the nesting tool, it's faster, it'll do everything you need it to. If you do care about grain direction, you need to be laying it out yourself, because as much as We love a computer that will automate a task for us. It doesn't work if it's going to automate it in a way that's not intelligent or that doesn't take into account all the information, which it can't possibly do at this point. So anyway, here we are. We've got all these pieces parts laid out. The first thing I want to do now is to make sure that I am in top view exactly. So I'm going to click that a couple times. And then I'm going to use a tool called Flat Shot. And this is going to make a two-dimensional representation of all of the three-dimensional shapes that are on my screen at the or that are in my model at the moment. That's one of the reasons why you don't want to do this with a whole bunch of stuff in your model. It's going to ask, the defaults are fine. It's going to say, okay, where do you want to put this block that we just created? And I'm going to say, put it 0, 0, 0. And it's going to ask me, what scale of X do I want? And I'm going to say 1. Then it's going to ask about the scale for Y. I'm going to say 1. And the rotation angle, I'm going to say 0. And, oh, where did it go? Well, the answer to that, friends, is behind the plywood. So you can see there, I just hid that. And the plywood is there. I'm going to go ahead and put all of those parts onto their own plywood layer. Normally, if I'm working on something, they would already be on a different layer, but I just left them on 0 for that last one because reasons. I just didn't want to bother. So now that they're on their own layer, I can just look at the original thing or unlook at the original thing as necessary. Lovely. So the downside to this is that these objects need to be able to extrude, or they need to be closed shapes. And right now, what they're block references, which means that there's nothing about closed shapes, which means we probably are going to have trouble with this when we take it into Aspire, I think. That might have changed recently. It definitely, Aspire 7 or whatever I learned on really hated blocks. So I was always taught to explode the blocks that you flat shotted and then rejoin them back together and see what happens. The easiest way to see if a bunch of things are closed and which ones aren't is to extrude them, or start the extrude command and see if everything extrudes as a solid. And it actually looks like it all is, which is lovely. Let's check these. Yep, that one works. Great, that one works. If they don't, let's say, let me explode this. Let's say that they didn't join and they're not a closed shape. You know, maybe it says line, maybe it says polyline, but that it's not closed. There are absolutely times when you'll get something like this, where this is, you know, ever so slightly, let's just do this one. Let's say it's that. And I join those together and they join and they become one, but this corner technically isn't closed. So one thing you can do is go into your properties and say, close it, and it should close it. Let's see what happens if we try to extrude it. It still doesn't want to extrude. So I'm going to trim this. Oh, I'm just going to move that like that. And now we try to extrude it. Oh my goodness. There we go. So now we have that closed shape. So just make sure that all of these objects are indeed closed before you try to take it into Aspire. The other thing that I usually do is put these onto layers that have meaning relative to what I need them to do. So in this case, one thing I'm going to do first is go to, instead of color by block, go to color by layer. And then line type wants to be by layer. That'll be important layer. All of this stuff should be by layer. Okay. And then I'm going to make a couple of new layers, and I'm going to call them my CNC layers. And this one is going to be CNC outside through cut, and then I'm going to include a depth. So that's going to be 0.72 inches, because that's how thick a sheet of plywood is for realsies. I'm going to give that its own color. And then I'm going to make another one. I'm going to call that CNC inside through, and I'm going to give it a depth as well. And I'm going to give it its own color. Now, the reason we want to do that is because you can select by layer in in Aspire. And something that I haven't actually started doing it because I'm just so used to doing my own CNC files that it didn't really matter. Something that I have thought about doing is doing a different layer per type of cut per sheet. So, you know, if I have 5 sheets in this same drawing, maybe I'm coming through here, you know, let's say these are 2 different sheets. Maybe, oh, hang on a second, that's not the right place. You know, if I have instead CNC, maybe I make this CNC, how do I rename? There we go. You know, CNC sheet 1 inside through, CNC sheet 1 inside through, and then also CNC 2 inside through. This, you know, this could get tedious depending on whatever. It, in my opinion, it just depends on which bit of tedious you want to deal with. Another thing that I always do, if I have multiple sheets that I want to CNC, I'm going to space them exactly the same way every single time. So here, I'm going to copy this rectangle that I created. I'm going to put it 9 feet away. So it's 108 inches right there like that. And, you know, I'm just going to copy this for sake of example. And place those, you know, in the correct location. What that does for me is when I go into Aspire, I can just move the view or move the stuff a fixed amount, the same amount every single time, and it's going to line up exactly where I want it to every single time. But you may or may not actually need to do that. That's just a thing I do. Okay, so I'm going to go through and put the types of cuts that I'm doing on their correct layers. So this is an outside through cut. I'm going to say I want you on outside through. And these two are going to be inside through cuts. So I'm going to say I want you on your inside through cut. So now that I've done that, that's ready to rock and roll. Lovely, lovely. And then I'm going to go to plate it. And because I need to be able to communicate to whoever is going to be programming this for me what these mean. So the better that I can communicate that, or the more efficiently I can communicate that, the better. I'm going to put it in a view, specify corner, yada, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to put this on an anno layer. And I'm going to go ahead and set my dimension. Let's make it a 1 inch. Oh, look at that. Beautiful. I'm going to resize this a little bit just for my own sake here. Does that look about right? And you can put this in whatever orientation makes the most sense for you or whoever your operator is. You know, this gets its own view or whatever. Whatnot, blah, blah, blah. And the last thing, oh, that's interesting. Why did that do that? Why is that a different color? Let's go back to model space. It's not a different color in here. Huh, that's weird. Oh, before I start playing with this, I'm going to lock the display so I can't accidentally mess it up. That is so weird. It says color by layer. Oh, it's because I fussed with it. This wants to go on outside through by layer. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is go through, select all these pieces that are something other than this outside through cut, and I'm going to change the line type on the in the viewport. And the reason I'm going to do, oh, doesn't look like it changed. Let's see if it's a scale issue. Line type by layer, it's there. Maybe it's, this is one of those settings that's a little bit fussy, and I am very frustrated by its fussiness. Like, it should be easier than this. Oh, that's an outside through. maybe if I do that, center, maybe I change this line type scale to 5. Maybe I go in here and do a little T scale, make that 0.5. Yeah, sometimes this stuff just... Maybe it's just that it's so small that it needs to be a dash in order to see it. By layer. Side through 0.5, line type, dashed. Y'all, I have a love-hate relationship with AutoCAD, and right now it is hate. All right, there we go. We made it dashed. That's what we wanted. So the reason that I say that and do that is because you need to be able to communicate what that's supposed to be to your carpenter or to whoever is going to program this, and that's a great way to do it. Like using a line type is, in my opinion, a stronger choice than color, because, you know, what if you only have a black and white plotter? What if the person that is programming this for you is colorblind? It's something like 10% of the population is colorblind. That means that somebody in our program can't see colors when you use them in the same way that you do. You know, different eyes see brightness in different ways. Like there's issues with color. So, or at least using colors to communicate critical information. And I would argue that this is critical information. So have multiple ways of communicating it. That said, this isn't one of those things that has a standard. So make sure that when you do that, you include something in your drawing that says what that is. So in my situation, I'm probably going to come over here and I'm going to make that memo say legend or key or whatever it needs to. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to do a text box somewhere around here. And I'm going to say that first line is, what is that? Outside profile through cut. I might put in 0.72 inch depth. Maybe depth is 0.72 inches. You know, whatever it takes to communicate what you need to communicate. And then I'm literally going to draw. I'm going to put this on the appropriate layer. It's an outside through profile cut. And I'm going to make sure that that is what it's supposed to be. So that outside through cut is that. And honestly, this is probably one of those places where if I was going to be doing this a whole bunch, I am 100% making a thing that says it and then using it over and over and over again. Like there's no reason to have to do this multiple times. And like this is another place to pay attention to detail and use it as an opportunity to practice your detail. This is an inside profile through cut, same depth. That means I'm going to do another, you know what? I'm just going to copy this line down here. Look at that. I'm going to put it on the correct layer. I'm going to change the line type so that it looks correct. Yeah, great. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller and line it up correctly. And that lives right there forever. And and then you can fill the rest of this page however you would like. Make sure that you have labels on all the pieces. So I just have a label thing that I use. Remember, it should be clear, concise, all of the things, and these can be labeled however you would like. Maybe it's actually A, and maybe this one is B, and maybe this one is C, etc., etc. Over here, well, this label isn't going to fit there, but I should have an end leader. I do. Oh, look, it says label. Is that it? Standard. Oh, I'm going to need to make one, aren't I? Well, that's annoying. Anyway, there's a way to make a leader with a hex tag, so I would probably do that. If I didn't really feel like it, I might just do something like that. Oh no, put that in the right place, friends. That is a note and ID. That should be by layer. This should be one. Be careful, by the way, friends, of changing things in properties. Like, see, this is all changed because of what I did before. Just be careful. It can make things look really weird real fast. And then I can just use this and like copy that right there. Do whatever you got to do. That isn't necessarily ideal, but if that's what you got to do, then that's what you got to do. There's a way to do the unleader the correct way. I just don't feel like trying to figure out what it is on Mac at the moment. But, this is part whatever. And you carry that all the way through. And then you can say something like, anything that doesn't have a label is scrap. Throw it away. So there's that. The other advantage of doing this with AutoCAD is that you're plating in an environment that you're familiar with and that you can control a little bit better, and then that's easy to communicate back in other places. Something that I always try to do when I'm CNCing something, I try to label my parts as I'm working, and then have that written down somewhere so that I know that I'm labeling things correctly, because it's super easy to mislabel your parts. And that's fine. It's not that big of a deal if it's like, oh, well, this doesn't fit. Let's just switch these two pieces. It's probably correct. But it is useful to pause and think through how you need to communicate and what information you need on there to communicate. It's going to bug me that all are the same. So anyway, there's that. Honestly, the big takeaway is take the time that you need. Oh, hang on a second. Okay, for whatever reason, these got changed to dashed. Make sure before you save these as, oh, that's the last thing we should do. Hang on. So when I go to save this, I'm going to click Save As, and I'm just going to put it on my desktop for now. This should be saved as, whatever the unit number is, unit 100, stairs, CNC, or something like that. And instead of saving it as a .dwg, you're going to save it as a .dxf. And then save, and then there's that. And now you can take that DXF into Aspire and get it set up to CNC really quickly. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have questions. We're still trying to figure out exactly what the workflow wants to be for this. And at some point, once we've had the time to actually sit down and figure out what that is, we're gonna do a training session. But we haven't gotten there yet, and we probably won't until later in the semester. So until then, have fun. Good luck. Let me know if you have questions. Bye.